some that's okay. To actually run some jobs and do some computing. Before we start, for at least folks in the room who I can see, what department are you all from? Just shout. Botany, okay, in the back. Genetics. Forest and wildlife ecology. Jean-Yves is from biochem. Biotech Center. Okay. Entomology and other folks online. Okay, great. So hopefully the material that I prepared will kind of meet most of you where you're at in terms of your research goals. So we're going to start by talking about research problems. So here are three purely hypothetical researchers. Here's researcher number one. They've just joined they're a new student. They've just joined a plant pathology lab, studying very specifically plant genomes of some variety. And they can run their pipeline. So they've been trained up. They're going to run this pipeline on their samples. Now they have 50 samples. Okay. Researcher number two is doing a little bit more of a modeling project for their master's degree. So they've written the code to run a model that predicts something. And it takes about 3 to 4 hours. And they want to try it with different inputs, different input designs, and then see how the model performs. Okay. Contestant number three, member of a physics collaboration. They want to predict particles in a detector. And they already have some simulation code that they need to run. And the prediction estimate comes from basically running millions and millions of simulations. Okay, so hopefully at least one of these examples resonated with each of you, where you've been in that situation of like, oh, I need to run 1 million simulations, or I have 50 samples, or 50,000 samples, or whatever the scale is for you. And I'm going to compare all of these hypothetical researchers and show what they have in common, which is they each have a task or list of tasks. In this case, most of them have a list of tasks that would take too long to run sequentially on their local computer. So for our plant pathology researcher, their list of tasks is just their list of samples, right? They want to run the pipeline for each sample. For our researcher number two, they have a bunch of different like input parameters, and that's their list of tasks. It's their list of parameters. And for our physics researcher, it's the just list of simulations they need to run, right? So I want to give everyone just a minute to sort of think, is this me? Or what is it for me? What is my list? Is my list a list of samples? Is it a list of both, I have a bunch of samples and I want to run 3 different pipelines on them? So it's like a matrix. Is it that I'm doing like machine learning and I want to test different things? So we'll have this idea of a list in mind and come back to it in a little bit. But the real reason this is a problem is that, if you could run all 50 samples in 2 hours on your computer, it's not a problem, right? You do it, you're done. So the list of tasks becomes a problem when it takes too long to run sequentially on whatever you have locally, whether that's your lab desktop or your lab server or your own laptop. Once you start, always having to leave your computer running overnight to churn through your list, then you have a problem. Okay, so we want to do more. We don't want computing. We don't want your laptop to be a barrier to your research. So we want you all to be able to tackle big problems. And so in the world of computer science, the way to make things faster is always to run them in parallel. So more about that in a second. Basically going from a small number of resources, like one computer, to many resources. For example, many computers. Okay, so this is why we care, hopefully. And so there's different ways of running in parallel. You might have a single task, so that would be a single simulation, a single pipeline, a single command in the pipeline that can be parallelized and run on like different pieces of the same computer. So that's what's shown on the left. Parallelizing on computer components. This is how a lot of like machine learning libraries work, is this idea of like the computer components have lots of little pieces and you can break up your problem and run them in parallel. Then on the right, we have more of this, I don't know, next level or different level of parallelization where you don't do anything with the task you want to run. So it's exactly the same as you would run it on your computer. You just farm them out to many computers. So it'd be like if I'm like, you know, all my friends gathered here, I have 10 samples I want to run. Can you all loan me your 10 laptops? And I'll go and I'll start each one. And then hopefully they all finish in the same time it takes to do one, right? So this is what we call high throughput computing, which is a really long name for, I think, a very simple idea. Just take, here's my list of tasks, and I want to distribute my tasks out to a bunch of computers. Okay, so some terms that we're going to introduce or going to appear later to describe what's happening in this process. So we define your task, single task, as what's called a job. So any shared computing system, we talk about jobs. That's the thing you want to run. And it's taking what you might do on your laptop or desktop and kind of formalizing it into a specific language. And when we do the hands-on demo, you'll see exactly what that looks like in terms of defining the job. Part of the reason we need this formal description is that we are not going to run every item in our list ourselves. Because logging, like even if I had 10 laptops, like is in front of me now, and I had to go through and manually start my different analyses on each one, just 10 would be time consuming. Imagine if you wanted to do like 50 or 100. So we want to automate that process, and that's done via a program called a scheduler that can take jobs. So you give the scheduler your well-defined jobs, and then it will assign the jobs to what we call execution points. So that's just a computer that can run jobs for you. And I throw this up here because we gave like an intro tutorial last year, and someone was like, can you actually define these things? So we're gonna, when we talk about actual computational resources, we usually mean 3 to 4 things. So we mean the actual processing power of the computer, sometimes called a core, sometimes called a CPU. Technically different, but for our purposes, same idea. Memory or RAM. So this is like the working memory of the computer. It's used by processes that are currently running. If your computer crashes or turns off, it empties out so that, you know, it's not persistent in that way. Your disk space, your hard drive, is persistent, and that's where we store things like files. And then GPUs are a specialized processing unit, graphical processing unit. So same kind of function as a GPU, or as a CPU, but more specialized. Okay, so those are all terms that'll appear through the rest of the presentation and demo. Okay, ooh, nope, too far. Okay, so let's say we're a researcher. We're one of those 3 researchers. We know we have a list of tasks. We know it's too long to run on our own computer. We're like, okay, I'm ready to embrace the high throughput computing lifestyle. How am I going to do that? You know, this sounds great in theory, right? Oh, I'll send all my tasks out to all these computers. But, you know, I don't keep a bunch of computers in my back pocket, and probably you don't as well. So in order for this all to work, you need access to a system like this with lots and lots of computers. You need tools to manage and run the list of tasks, the scheduler. You'll have to assemble all the components that are part of what makes your task run, and a home to kind of organize and submit everything. So as it happens, computing at CHTC has a high throughput computing system that does all these things. So I won't go into these slides in detail. This is more, I'll share the slides with Emil and Claudia, and they can share them with all of you. But just, this is part of what we do, is we run these big computing systems with lots of computers. We have besides the high throughput system, we have a high performance system, which for code that's optimized in different ways. We can provide space for your data. We can handle your software. So we are at least trying to be, one place that you can use as a home for your research computing workflow that has all these computers. We also have access to resources beyond what we have on campus. So these are all kinds of, this is the resource piece of what we provide. And anybody who's at the university can use CHTC services at no cost. So assume that's most of you in this room. And so what we do today is an option for you to do moving forward. So I am part of the facilitation team, as is Amber on Zoom. And so we are the kind of human interface at CHTC to help people kind of understand what I just talked about, like why should you use CHTC or why not should you use CHTC? You know, when is it a good fit? What's the trade-off in terms of the work you have to do versus the payoff you should see in terms of how fast things run? And so we do all kinds of things. CHTC is also a research lab that develops high throughput computing technologies. So we also can try to change things. So we also want to hear about, as you use CHTC, your struggles and woes. So things we don't do, we assume that you already know more or less how to run what you want to run, right? We can't provide domain-specific advice, like which algorithm or method you should use. We can't help debug codes in detail. Sometimes we do help with little pieces of debugging as it relates to running on CHTC, but you know, we can't teach you how to code in general or run things for you. But we can connect you with groups on campus that do provide that kind of support and help. So once you've gotten the help you need to kind of get to that stage of I can run my thing, that's when we can take over and help you transition to running it in CHTC if that's appropriate. Okay, I'll pause there. Is this rest of the slides and then the demo are more about like, here's how we actually do the stuff. Questions about CHTC or computing or anything?
I don't have a question, but you had a slide that showed the difference between HTC and HPC.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to tell us the difference?
Yeah, so we have two computing systems, a high throughput system and a high performance system. Unfortunately, very similar in name. So the high throughput system is the one we're going to use today, and it's for the use cases I described, running like a long list of tasks where you want to send each task to a different computer. The high performance system is for computational tasks that are just larger and where each individual task has to be parallelized on multiple cores or multiple processors to be tractable. So I'm guessing that most people in this room, with some exceptions, I know things like genome assembly can be just very core and memory intensive, but that a lot of like bioinformatics pipeline processing is very much just like you need a couple cores and you just run sequentially. And so that's more of a high throughput thing. Yeah.
I have a question. So starting out, I think one natural fear that people have is like, am I going to break something? So you maybe talk a little bit about like,
Yeah.
what's the potential?
So Emil's question is, yeah, what happens if we break something, or how likely it is can a user break something? So we certainly have, yeah, one of my slides at the end is about being a responsible citizen. It used to be in this section. We have a lot of safeguards in place. So like if you run something that uses a lot of memory or a lot of cores, more than you expected or than it's supposed to, that we will basically kill it and give you a little message that's like, you used too much memory, you did this wrong, and then you can fix and redo. So that's not a problem. Every file space in CHTC as a quota, so you can't accidentally fill up the HIAP file system. You might fill up your folder, but then you are the only one that suffers, not everybody else. I would say the main issue where people can cause trouble for themselves and others is running things directly on the login node or access point. Because we don't have a lot of controls, we want people to have some flexibility. But if everybody decided to run like a compute intensive process on the login node, it would crash super fast, which would be bad. So that's about it. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay.
But I think that, I would say that's an important point, that people have to understand that nothing they run is really interactive on where they log in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that'll come up later. Yeah, did you have a question?
Programming languages, different pipelines require R.
Yeah, so this is a great question. Is there a limitation on the languages? So I like zoomed through the slide that talked a little bit about software. No, anything that runs on Linux, which is most things except for some very specific like Windows programs, and that you can run in a non-interactive way where you can script it totally and you don't have to like put in inputs as it's running, can run on CHTC. We don't have a lot of stuff pre-installed. So everything you want to use, you have to work on and collaborate on an installation with us or with other people. But we have a lot of guides about that, and we are working to make it more shareable so that that's less of a barrier for people. But yeah, I mean, yes, some bioinformatics programs are really headachy because there's just like a lot of little bits, but like R, Python, Julia, no big deal. A lot of the really well-established tools, Bowtie, we're going to do a fast QC example, super straightforward. I think it's once you start getting into things that like were developed for someone's PhD thesis and haven't been touched for 2 years, that like, that's just more challenging, but we almost always get it done in the end. So. Yeah. Okay, so what does this actually look like? We have our tasks we want to run. We've run things on our computer before. So going to CHTC, there is a shift. You know, we're, especially with, I don't know, something like R, we have like your nice R Studio window and you can like do lots of different things. Running in CHTC, you're running on computers that are in a room somewhere in the basement, and things have to be scripted and run in a slightly different way. And so what that looks like is that you from your laptop will log into a specified login node, or what we call an access point. You'll define the jobs you want to run and submit them to a job queue. And then those will be scheduled and run on the actual computers of the system. So again, these are the things, well, all of this is in a basement room somewhere in the computer science building. So this is the process, and it requires some learning. A big piece of that is just learning how to work within this scheduled system and communicating with the scheduler, which on this system is HT Condor. And so the advantage is, I alluded to earlier, that you know, you can automate things. You don't have to manually start 50 different processes or 100 different processes. Things are managed. We can have, this is what allows us to have a shared system. So I'm guessing some of you have been on a scenario where there's a lab server and you have to have like a piece of paper on the wall that's like who's using the server at what time, right? That's not feasible if we have several hundred users with many servers. And so the scheduler takes the place of that piece of paper. And you don't have to stay connected. Like you submit, once you've submitted things, you can log out from the system and it's going to run on its own. So that's all great. The trade-off is you have to learn how to do this. You have to, you know, put a little time into learning how to use the scheduler, getting your jobs up and running. And I think it's true of anything in computing. I would say that if you want to do things that are more powerful and more advanced, you have to learn a little bit and find the computer scientist inside yourself, as small as they may be, in order to make progress. Okay, so what we're communicating to the scheduler is CHTC in our case, is what I like to think of as components of the job. So the commands I want to run, information about the software environment, information about the input I need, typically input files, information that the scheduler needs to know how much space to give me for each task or job, and how to record information that gets created. And so if, this is I hope this is mostly accurate. The first step of a bioinformatic pipeline, we have paired end reads and a reference, and you're gonna align, bow ties and aligner. Yes, okay. And so this is a flow chart of, files that are created and the commands you would run. And so we want to start thinking about mapping these into our mental model of a job and the components of a job. So we're going to have 3 input files. We have 2 commands. And our software environment needs to include these 2 tools. So this next slide is going to be like that escalated quickly. But what I want to make clear is that those things that you know about your workflow is what you're translating into this, HTC submit file format. So your commands, I'll stop waving at the screen. People on Zoom can't see me. Your commands go into their own script. So that's just a script with commands. And then this is referenced as the executable up here. One way to create kind of pre-built software environments is through containers. So that's what we have here. This is a container with bow tie. We list our input files. So our 2 reads and our reference. There's options for recording error, output, and logging information. There's options for the number of cores, amount of memory, and amount of disk we want to use. And this keyword at the end just indicates that we want to run 1 task. It can be modified to run multiple. So again, what I want to illustrate here is not so much like the exact details of the submit file, but that you're taking the relevant information about your pipeline and translating it into this format. So we're going to do this for real, and hopefully it's going to work. And if it doesn't, then you're going to get a demo, not a hands-on. Okay, so everybody open up this link, notebook.ospool.osg-htc.org. And then you should be taken to a login page, and you should be able to choose UW-Madison as a login option, and then just use your normal NetID credentials to log in. And I'm gonna wait a couple minutes for everybody to get that far. This is where we're actually gonna whoops. Okay. Emil is on it. On the spot. So again, notebook.ospool.osg-htc.org. It's quite a, I am going to log in with a different identity because I am special. But everyone else should just be able to use their Madison identity. And then this is the real test. So we see if this is actually going to have everybody start. Meanwhile, we'll kill some time. Shouldn't take that long. So if it's taking a while, I'll send up an SOS to my colleague and be like, hey, what's happening? Has anyone successfully connected? Or is it still kind of waiting? Do you see this? Or do you have a progress bar?
It's just,
Circulating? Oh, that's. Okay, yeah. There should be a button that allows you to start the server. And now it's waiting. Okay. Cool, 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 cool.
I connected for some.
Okay. I feel like I'm at the same spot. I'm gonna go to my direct link. Oh, amazing. Okay. The moral of the story is everybody just be patient. And hopefully we'll all get on eventually. Is anyone on this screen? Are you still waiting for it to start? Still waiting. Okay. Good to know. Yeah, so do I. Woohoo. While we're waiting. To well and eventually connected. Okay, great. Server requested. I can give a little context. We'll skip over the slide for what's actually happening. So we just saw this diagram. And how you access the system is from your computer, you log in, and then you submit jobs. And there you go. So what we're doing right now is using this little test setup that's technically not part of CHTC, but it's a little bit of a friendlier interface once it finally loads. So that you on your computer are connecting to this Jupyter interface, which is in front of like a temporary test access point. And when you submit jobs, they're going to this little temporary test pool. If we were actually using CHTC, you'd probably be using a terminal or PuTTY, or, I mean, you can connect with like VS Code and MOBA Xterm. There's a lot of different ways to connect. But I would essentially be doing the same kind of thing if I'm logging in to one of the CHTC access points, which is AP 2001 or AP 2002. And then I, have access to the full CHTC pool. So it looks different, but it's the same thing. Oh, wunderbar.
Are you cases where it's like, I don't know.
So the long-term plan actually is to try to have something like this in front of the actual real CHTC access points so that you wouldn't have to use the terminal to log in. You could just do it from a web browser. But we have not quite gotten there, or have at least some kind of like website you could go to, and that's how you can access things.
So this is all just temporary.
So this particular setup is just, it's starting up this temporary little test access point, this temporary little pool that's associated with, so you're in like this little mini system, basically, just you. Okay. Sometimes the first ones are a little slow. Amber, is yours started?
Yeah, on my notebook got started.
Ooh, this looks promising. Woohoo. See, server ready. So it says. I'm assuming this all works. This is what's happening next. Woohoo! Oh, so did I. Da, 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 da. All right. Good times for everyone. Okay. Is there anyone that's still waiting? Yes, people in the back row. Okay. We will perhaps continue, but very slowly, so you can catch up. And you'll see the main thing is getting the setup. So I'll make sure to go back to that slide a couple times in order to make sure that this is full. Okay, so let's actually make this not quite so small. Once you're in this window, you want to open a terminal. And so again, this Jovian is like a generic user. We're on this little temporary access point. We have a little pool. And there's some preloaded tutorials, actually. We are going to delete one of them and clone a more CHTC specific version. So you'll want to run rm-rf tutorial-fastqc in the terminal you have open. And just to note, what I'm using here is the terminal from the bottom row of the launcher. And then a git clone. And it's going to be git clone github.com/CHTC, and then the same tutorial name, tutorial-fastqc. So then that should reappear in our little file window on the left. And then once that's happened, you'll want to open the fastqc tutorial.notebook, which is the one with the little orange picture icon, as opposed to the markdown file. So it'll look something like this. So this is where we want to get to. And for those still following along, okay. So hopefully most of you have used a notebook, at some point in the past. So all the commands that we're going to run for this, and all the files we need are on the left. All the commands are in the notebook. This is actually a bash notebook, so the cells are actually running shell commands. So I could just copy and paste and run these in the terminal, but it's like nice to have them here and in the pretty output. And so that's what we're gonna do. So you can run the commands either by clicking the little play button at the top here, or by typing Shift Enter. So these first two commands are just going to do what I did over in the window viewer and move us into the tutorial fastqc folder. And we'll confirm that by running the print working directory command. Okay. Yeah. No, it's okay.
You should go back to the first two commands.
Yeah, these two? Yes. There you go. They're hopefully correct. Yeah, this is the only thing. Next time I'll be more prepared and hopefully it will be preloaded. But this was the thing. Okay. So back to my tutorial window. And so this tutorial walks through doing fast QC, the fast QC step of a bioinformatics pipeline. I personally do not have a background in biology or biological sciences. So if that is you as well, I think it's safe to say we like to use this example as a stand-in for any process where you're analyzing a data file, right? You have some kind of input data, you want to run it through some kind of program, no matter what it is, and get some kind of output. In this case, the program we're using is FastQC, and the data we're using is sequencing data. But the principles remain the same for a variety of use cases and research domains. All right. So assuming we've run these two commands, we're in the FastQC directory, we're going to think about those job components I mentioned earlier and bring them all together. So before we do that, something that we have done in developing this tutorial that you don't always think about at the beginning, and I would say you don't have to, but once you're ready to start running a lot of things, it's very important to think about, which is organization. So we've created these folders for the data, for the logging information, for the results of FastQC, and for the software. And so a lot of how this example is set up will put things in the right place. And that's just something for you to think about as you develop your own workflows. So we have a little script that's going to download the data for us. So you can run this cell, has download data, and it should download 6 very mini FastQ files for the purposes of this example. And so this is, I mean, this would be the same for all of you as uploading data files that you have, downloading them from a database, something along those lines. So that's one component. Another component of the job is going to be our software environment. So we want to run FastQC. There's different ways to do this. And this is where I would say people often spend the most time just because who previously in their life has tried to install software on Linux in the normal course of things? Not most people. So it's understandably a little bit of a learning curve. So for this example, we're just going to download a pre-built container file. So this is a special file format that basically captures like a whole environment. So if anyone's used Conda environments or Python virtual environments, I don't think there's a good equivalent in R, except maybe the project structure. But this file format captures like a whole Linux system with FastQC installed. And if you're interested in how it was built, there's a little more information at the bottom here. So Patricia Tran over in bacteriology actually has this whole amazing repository of like recipes for building containers with bioinformatics tools. So I just used one that she had made and built this myself for this training. But just to give a sense of like, maybe a little more of a sense of what this looks like. So we downloaded into the software folder this .cif file. And you all don't need to follow along in this section. This is just a demo. So if I try to run FastQC now, it's not installed, right? There's no reason that FastQC is installed in this little test instance. But if I use a command that will start a terminal or a shell inside FastQC software, FastQC. the container file, I run fastqc, it's there. So that's why this file has the fastqc tool that we need. All right. So we have our data, we have our software, we have a question.
Yeah, yeah. Quick question, like relative merits and like
Mm,
uses of Docker.
AppTainer, yeah. So to make life more exciting, there's different flavors of containers. So this .cif format is one type of software container format. And then there's another very common tool called Docker. Oh, what do I usually tell people? I usually tell people that if you want to run on CHTC and your computer and potentially share with your lab mates and everybody uses the exact same environment, then Docker is better because it's more cross-platform. It's much easier to run on your laptop and much easier it has better sharing infrastructure. If you're like, no, I just want to run, I run it on my laptop and then I want to run it on CHTC, but I already have everything installed on my laptop, then I would use AppTainer because you can just build that in CHTC. You don't need to install anything extra on your computer. You just have your CHTC account, you build your .cif file, and you're good to go. More or less. If you fall between those two examples, kind of up to you. All right. So the last thing, so it's been a while, but the previous slides, when I had my flow chart with the yellow boxes, I talked about input files, which we just downloaded. I talked about software environment, which we just downloaded, and then commands. So I've put my commands into this fastqc.sh script, which you could also just click on over here and look at if you want to. Very simple. Just fastqc. This is using a argument. So the file name is actually going to be passed in from outside the script. But otherwise it's like literally it's just the command. Okay, so those are my components, right? Those are all the ingredients for my beautiful fastqc job. And so now this is again where there's sort of a big change, and we're going to look at all those pieces together. So if I look at fastqc.submit, this is a Condor submit file that defines my job, and it's going to run the script we just looked at with the name of one of our files as the argument to the script. We're going to provide information about our software environment that we're using a container, and this is it. We're going to give information about our input data, just one of these FASTQ files. We're going to provide information about our output data, specifically the output we want transferred back, which requires us to have run the program before and know what that is. And this little piece of syntactical wonder is going to move it to the results folder. That's definitely a work in progress. And then we have our logs folder. And so we'll store all these like error out information, the resources we need, 1 CPU, 1 GB of memory, 1 GB of disk, and 1 job. Okay, so that's all present here in our access point folder. And so to submit, we run Condor submit and the name of this special Condor file, fastqc.submit. So that should, if all goes well, submit 1 job. And then this command tells you about its status in the queue. So mine has started running already. So should yours, because you each have your own little test pool that you're using and you're the only person there. That's it. At this point, I could disconnect, could go do something else. Condor has my job and it's gonna take care of things. It should run pretty quickly. That's a great question. So the question is, will Condor Queue tell you how long until it starts, basically, and how long it will run? Yeah. So not directly, no. So it's hard to predict when the job will run because resources are always kind of in flux. But how long it ran is something that you can get some information about. So mine is already done. Hopefully that's true for everybody else. If it disappears from the queue, that means it's finished. And so first, we'll check our results folder. So again, you could run the ls results command here using play or shift enter, or you can just click on the folder over here on the left and delightfully, here's our report. It ran. Don't ask me anything about the science here. But I'm happy that an output was produced. But the other thing to look at, besides our results, is the logging files that we asked Condor to track and create. So if I go back to my tutorial FastQC directory, maybe, don't freeze on me, bud. There we go. There's an error file. So this just has little messages printed by FastQC. There's an output file, also just little messages. But then there's also this log file, which not world's most readable file. But the thing to look at is basically the kind of first line of each section. This has timestamps of when the job was submitted, when it started moving the input files, when it started running. And at the end, the very end, it should have this little table where it shows how many cores you actually used, how much disk you actually used. So I actually under requested. So I should change that in the future. This container is a lot bigger than the previous one for this example. Memory is probably good. I think I requested 1 GB and I used 75%. So time execute, I don't remember the exact difference between these two, but time executing should be about how long it took for your code to run in seconds. So this is obviously like very short example. But if you saw something like 4,200, be like, oh, okay, it took a little over an hour. And so that gives you, you can also figure it out if you really want to using the timestamps of like, okay, this is when it terminated and this is when it started executing, but don't do that. Just use the information that's printed here. So first job complete. Questions about that process or things you'd like to know more about that I glossed over? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, put data on the system. Yeah. No. So you can get clone things. I'm again in the real world, when you're using CHTC, you typically be using like a terminal or another tool that allows you to upload and download files. So like if I'm on my computer, you can see like this is what's in something I want to upload. I could use a command to upload files or download files. We have, for some of our file systems, we have a Globus endpoint that can be used to transfer data. And there's a lot of tools like for Windows, there's a tool called WinSCP that is specifically, you just like drag and drop your files from the access point to your computer and vice versa. CyberDuck is another one. There's a bunch of little programs that you can use to help upload and download files. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the connection with this research drive?
Yeah, so there's a on the CHTC website, you can transfer files directly between CHTC and Research Drive. You log in and then you run this command. And then the interface is not great, but it does work. So if you have a lot of data and you want to just do it directly, that should work. What's the question?
You have to transfer the files.
Yes. At the moment, you have to transfer the files to CHTC before you can use them. We are prototyping something where you wouldn't have to, where you could just access it directly, but still very much in the prototyping phase of life. Other specific questions? Anyone get any errors?
So using like HT Condor,
Mhm.
when your job is complete, is that just become taken off the system?
So
So that other people?
yeah, so what's actually happened behind the scenes here is, so I say Condor submit, and then I give my job, that's me giving my job to Condor, and it manages this whole queue of jobs. And then behind the scenes, what it does is it finds a computer for me, it assigns a little chunk of that computer, it makes a directory or a folder, moves data over, runs, and then it moves the output back and deletes, sort of releases your hold on it. So the metaphor I use a lot to describe what a scheduler is doing is it's like the host at a very busy restaurant, and the computers are the tables. So you are coming in and being like, I have a party of 4, I want to run a job like this. And you give the host, Condor, your information, and then it goes and says, okay, do I have a table of 4? Or do I have a computer that will meet this person's needs? Assigns it, runs it, and then once you don't need it anymore, it just goes back into the general pool. Does that make sense? Sort of, okay. Any other questions? It's like a lot of information. I'm not giving all the details either. Yes,
What happens if I want to do a different job?
yeah.
Am I able to do that, like 2 different jobs?
So you would just want to make a different script with a different command. So this is a fast QC script. You don't have a different script to do the other thing. And a submit file to describe that kind of job. And you could submit them both, and they would just be in the queue and they'd run when they run, and it doesn't really matter. So you control basically everything about the job from that perspective. And so you can decide what kind of jobs you want to run, how many jobs you want to run. It's almost too flexible sometimes because you have to come up with some of that initial like conceptual work yourself, but that's also a thing we can help with.
Jobs are done.
Yes, there is a way to be notified when jobs are done. It's like notification equals true, and then you have to say, put your email address in, but yeah, that's an option. Okay. Other questions? So, yeah. So I will say, so the real power of this system, to go back to the beginning, is we don't want to run just one fast QC. We want to run many, potentially dozens to hundreds. The problem is on this little temporary cluster, it was not working for me earlier today. So we're going to give it a try, but it might freeze, and then it will remain an exercise for the reader in that sense. But basically, we go back to all that we need to change, or all we need to do in order to do many samples instead of just one, to do a list instead of a single task, is to create the list. So in this example, if I run these 2 cells, I make a list of my sample IDs. And then there's a different version of the submit file to illustrate this. The main thing that's changed here is at the end, this is essentially a for loop. So it's saying submit a job for each sample in my list. So my list has 6 items, it should submit 6 jobs. And then each item in the list, it was 6 different sample names. This is a variable that I can use in the submit file to indicate like what's different for each job. So I'm going to have 6 different output files, right? So sample here represents the correct sample name for that job. Same with the output, same with the input. So if folks are familiar with a for loop, it's like a for loop, but upside down because the for loop is here. This is like 4 sample in list, queue a job per sample. And then this is the body of the loop, where almost like a template, where you're using the variable from your for loop to fill in the appropriate information. Okay. So make a list, turn this single submit file kind of into a for loop structure, and then submit. That's all that needs to happen. All right, I'm gonna submit, but I don't, ooh, actually, no, I'm not. First, I'm gonna change my disk request because I don't think it was correct. Okay. I'm gonna give that, and we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, so it's just like, it was like running before, but then not exiting properly. Why? Who can say? But that's it. That's the basics of what it's like to submit jobs, a little bit why. I'll just say, so again, what we're using right now is just this little temporary setup with the notebook in front. In CHTC, you would probably connect with a terminal or some other tool to a CHTC access point, and there'd be many, many more computers in the pool that are actually running things. And so, whoop, actually show my slides. See, so you could clone this repository and run this analysis in exactly the same way on CHTC if you have an account, just running the commands from the notebook. So I can, I'm gonna go all over our windows here. I'm logged in here. This is all still sharing properly. Wow. So I could clone the repository here. And then download the data. So these are just all, again, all the commands from the notebook that you could run yourself if you have an account or you get one. Download software. I'm actually gonna pull back this fancy guy. See if how my jobs are doing. Oh, they finished. Okay, I just wasn't requesting enough disk before. I think that was the issue. So I should have my 6 results, which I do. So they all ran more or less simultaneously. But anyway, so I am gonna manifest concerns. So we can change that here too. I'll update the tutorial next time. So same thing, Contra submit. I'm just jumping straight to the multiple jobs. So it's all the same. Same thing, different interface. Very different interface, but basically doing the same things. So back to the slides for real then. So I mean, some caveats, because it's likely in real life you would have much larger data files, and the 6 container file that we're using is also large-ish, that they would go in actually a different folder. That's something you can set up if you have your account. And I obviously blazed through some details. We didn't actually install software together. So that would be a bit more work the first time around. Just putting the script together and figuring out the submit file and all of that. We have a ton of guides on the website, especially for job submission. We have like a hello world example that you can just run through to get yourself oriented to the structure of the submit file. But yeah, So I would just want to set realistic expectations. You know, the goal is you get to a point where you've done the work, and then it really is, you just do counter submit and off go 60 jobs, and you don't have to think about them for another couple hours until you get all your results. And that's what we want, is we want you to be able to do your research in a reasonable way. And so the work to get there, we can help with, and that's part of the process of getting started. So here's the power and responsibility slide. So Emil asked, you know, how can we break the system? So there are a lot of people using the system, you know, on any given day, we probably have several dozen users. So more, it's just like being aware of that. And if you aren't sure about something, just asking. We do have like a user expectations page that kind of outlines things that are not great and things that are okay. But it's, you know, it's as much for you as for other people. Because typically, if you cause problems for other people, you're also causing problems for yourself. And that's the real thing, again, we want to avoid. So.
Instead of like learning the login.
Mhm. Yep.
How would you create problems?
So honestly, not too many. Like you're more likely to create problems for yourself, like your jobs will get killed or you run out of disk space. The login node is the biggest one, to be honest, because people will sometimes run things and that will interfere. Sometimes there's ways of submitting jobs, or like if people are using really big data files and not putting them in our big data file system, then there's just a lot of data moving in and out of the login node, and that can slow things down, which is, again, something that usually negatively impacts you as the person submitting, but also other people. But there's not, I want to say there's not too many ways. Like, it's, you know, if you do your best to follow our instructions, you'll hopefully do all right. Okay. So here's where you might be in this process: learning about CHTC, getting an account, logging in, learning about job submission, implementing a job, testing, running things, getting your results. This is kind of the whole process. So wherever you are in this process, we can help you kind of get to the next thing. So if you want an account, you can apply for one. And folks who have come to this training, sometimes we meet with people if they're part of new groups, but we can maybe skip that if you came here because like you've already gotten an intro. But once you have your account, so next stages in the flow chart, we have a bunch of docs. We host office hours on Zoom twice a week, so you don't have to go anywhere. Stay in your office, and you can schedule an initial consultation with us if you like, and you can also stay after and ask questions. So we're here to, the facilitation team is here to help you kind of move along that flow chart to get your work done. And I think that's it. So happy to, if there's any general questions from online or in the room, take those, and then otherwise, I think that's it. Thank you all for your patience with our exciting notebook situation. Yeah. Yeah, so the notebooks you're using right now are not permanent. So anything you do on this little test system is going to be deleted after a couple hours. So a long-term account, we need to take your NetID, add it to our real account management system, and then you'll be able to log into like a full persistent CHTC access point where you have a home directory and it's tied to your identity. Yeah.
And we like filled out that survey, how will we know when we have to go?
I will hopefully email you. Yeah. So we'll try to follow up within the next couple days, but if you haven't heard, feel free to email the CHTC address and be like, I went to the workshop and I really want an account and I haven't heard anything, and we'll make sure to get back to you. Yeah. Okay. Online questions. Yes, I will make sure, there was a question about will the slides be sent out? I'll make sure Emil and Claudia send those out. So you should have them. And it's not permanent, but this little test notebook setup is something that you could access to like play around with anytime. Just don't do any long-term permanent work there because it can disappear. If you want to like really do kind of real stuff, then you should apply to get a full account at CHTC. All right. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Yeah. Give you myself.